Can one famous face turn a $200 million dream into a public humiliation? Studios will blame bad marketing, weak scripts, angry fans, or unlucky release dates, but sometimes the damage is standing right in the center of the poster. These blockbusters had massive budgets, huge worlds, and franchise hopes attached to them, yet one performance became impossible to defend. Tonight, we are opening the box office crime scene, and some names will hurt. The 13th Warrior, Antonio Banderas, 1999. A Viking nightmare needs mud, blood, and a hero who looks like he belongs in the slaughter. The 13th Warrior had everything that should have made a brutal late 90s adventure work. Foggy villages, ancient terror, Norse warriors, and Michael Crichton's grim imagination behind the story. But Antonio Banderas, playing Ahmad ibn Fadlan, always feels like a polished outsider in a movie that needed raw survival energy. The idea of a refined traveler thrown among violent warriors is strong, and his character is meant to be our doorway into fear. The problem is that Banderas never fully transforms. He brings elegance and charm, but not enough dread, awe, or desperation. Around him, the Vikings feel rough, dirty, and half-mythic. He often looks too graceful for the nightmare surrounding him. The troubled production, reshoots, and inflated cost hurt the film badly. But the central casting made the world feel uneven. Instead of pulling us deeper into the legend, the lead keeps reminding us he does not quite fit inside it. The monsters were scary, but the mismatch was louder. Cutthroat Island, Geena Davis, 1995. A pirate queen has to make the ocean feel afraid of her. Cutthroat Island spent a fortune trying to bring back the grand, swashbuckling adventure, with enormous ships, cannon blasts, sword fights, treasure maps, and the kind of old-school spectacle Hollywood rarely attempted anymore. But Geena Davis, as Morgan Adams, never fully becomes the dangerous outlaw the movie needs at its center. Davis is talented and fearless, but this role demands reckless command, seductive menace, and the kind of presence that makes a crew follow her into death. Too often, her performance feels staged rather than savage, energetic rather than iconic. The film keeps surrounding her with explosions and impossible escapes, yet Morgan rarely feels like a pirate legend carved out of violence and ambition. Every duel depends on the audience believing she owns this world, and that belief never completely arrives. The production was chaotic, the budget was disastrous, and pirate films were commercially risky at the time, but the lead performance needed to cut through all that noise. Instead, the movie had a massive ship, a massive bill, and a captain who never quite convinced the audience to sail with her. Sahara, Matthew McConaughey, 2005. Hollywood wanted another Indiana Jones, but Sahara gave viewers a treasure hunter who smiled like danger was only a minor inconvenience. The film had franchise ambitions everywhere: desert chases, lost history, political corruption, secret treasure, military danger, and Matthew McConaughey as Dirk Pitt, the adventurous hero from Clive Cussler's novels. McConaughey brings charm, confidence, and movie star ease, but that relaxed energy also weakens the film's urgency. Dirk Pitt should feel clever, rugged, and impossible to kill, but he also has to make the stakes feel sharp. McConaughey often plays him with such sunny casualness that the danger slides away before it can grip the audience. He flirts through tension, jokes through chaos, and makes deadly situations feel like vacation obstacles. Steve Zahn adds comic spark, Penelope Cruz adds urgency, and the desert setting gives the story scope. But the center remains too light for a blockbuster trying to launch a major adventure franchise. Sahara was not a small misfire. It was an expensive attempt to create a new screen hero. The sandstorms, secrets, and explosions were there, but the lead never made the adventure feel dangerous enough. Alexander, Colin Farrell, 2004. A conqueror should enter the frame like history is already surrendering. Alexander had everything Oliver Stone could throw at an ancient epic: armies, betrayal, ambition, sexuality, politics, violence, and the impossible shadow of one of history's most famous military rulers. But Colin Farrell's Alexander became the easiest target because the performance never fully sells imperial command. Feral has intensity and emotional fire, yet here, that fire often feels scattered rather than majestic. The blonde styling, shifting accent, and frequent emotional breakdowns distract from the myth the film is trying to build. Alexander should feel like a genius who can inspire soldiers, terrify enemies, and burn through the known world because he believes destiny belongs to him. Feral's version often feels wounded, restless, and uncertain, more like a prince crushed by pressure than a leader reshaping civilization. The movie also struggles with pacing and structure, but the lead had to unify the chaos. Instead, he becomes part of it. Viewers needed to believe in both the man and the legend. They got a performance full of effort, but not enough authority. The Empire looked enormous. The man at its center felt strangely breakable. Pan, Hugh Jackman, 2015. A fantasy villain can be strange, but he still has to make the world feel real. Pan tried to reinvent Peter Pan as a giant origin story spectacle, with flying ships, chosen one mythology, colorful kingdoms, lost boys, and expensive visual fantasy. Hugh Jackman as Blackbeard sounded like the film's secret weapon because Jackman can dominate a screen with theatrical force. But here, the performance becomes so oversized that it starts pulling the movie apart. With the bald head, heavy costume, exaggerated gestures, and booming villain energy, his Blackbeard feels less like a terrifying pirate ruler and more like a stage performer trapped inside a children's nightmare. The movie already struggles to decide whether it wants to be dark, whimsical, funny, tragic, or franchise-ready, and Jackman's choices make that confusion louder. Levi Miller tries to give Peter an emotional center, but Blackbeard becomes the noisy image everyone remembers. The problem is not that Jackman lacks commitment. The problem is that he commits to a tone the movie cannot support. Pan needed wonder and danger working together. Instead, its biggest star made the fantasy feel artificial, over-designed, and desperate for magic that never truly arrived. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Charlie Hunnam, 2017. King Arthur should feel like destiny sharpening a sword, not a tough guy trying to win a street fight. King Arthur. Legend of the Sword tried to modernize the myth with Guy Ritchie's fast editing, cheeky dialogue, gritty streets, giant creatures, and a rough origin story built for franchise energy. Charlie Hunnam plays Arthur as a survivor from the lower world, and that idea has potential. The problem is that he never fully grows from street brawler into legendary king. Hunnam has physical confidence and a hard-edged coolness, but the role needs reluctance, pain, charisma, and finally royal gravity. Too often, he keeps Arthur locked at the same level of swagger, even when the movie demands awe. When Excalibur appears, the audience should feel history waking up. When Arthur accepts his destiny, the story should become mythic. Instead, the performance keeps dragging the legend back down into ordinary toughness. Jude Law brings sharper villainy, and the visuals push for epic scale, but the center lacks majesty. The film wanted to crown a new blockbuster ruler. Hunnam looked ready for a fight, but not quite ready for a kingdom. The Lone Ranger, Johnny Depp, 2013. Sometimes the sidekick becomes so loud that he swallows the hero, the story, and the entire reason the movie exists. The Lone Ranger was supposed to revive a classic American adventure brand with huge Western action, expensive train sequences, desert spectacle, and the blockbuster team behind Pirates of the Caribbean. But Johnny Depp's performance as Tonto became the movie's most debated weapon and its biggest distraction. Instead of giving the film a grounded, mysterious partner figure, Depp turned Tonto into a strange collection of eccentric gestures, deadpan jokes, face paint, and odd spiritual mystique. The movie clearly hoped his Jack Sparrow-style weirdness would create another pop culture icon, but the effect felt forced. Armie Hammer played the actual Lone Ranger, yet Depp's Tonto dominates the poster, the tone, and the audience's attention. That imbalance weakened the film's identity. Was this a heroic Western, a buddy comedy, a revenge tale, or another Depp costume performance built around quirks? The answer kept shifting. The action scenes were massive, and the train finale had real energy, but the emotional core was buried under tonal confusion. Depp did not single-handedly create every problem. But his performance became the face of the failure. The Lone Ranger needed mythic adventure. It got a Blockbuster wearing too much makeup. Jack the Giant Slayer, Nicholas Hoult, 2013. A fairy tale epic needs a hero who makes giants feel smaller, not a lead who disappears beneath the beanstalk. Jack the Giant Slayer tried to turn a simple childhood story into a massive fantasy blockbuster, complete with kingdoms, armies, sky-high castles, giant battles, and romantic adventure. The studio clearly wanted a fresh fantasy franchise that could attract younger audiences while still feeling big enough for adults. Nicholas Hoult played Jack, the farm boy pulled into a dangerous world above the clouds. Hoult is a capable actor, but this role needed a stronger spark. Jack should feel brave, charming, nervous, funny, and slowly transformed by the impossible world around him. Instead, Hoult's performance often feels too soft and too understated for the size of the movie. He looks believable as an ordinary young man, but not compelling enough as the emotional center of a giant-killing adventure. Ewan McGregor brings more playful energy in a supporting role, and the giants themselves have more personality than the hero at times. That creates a serious problem. When the creatures, castles, and side characters overpower the lead, the story loses momentum. The film had scale, money, and visual noise, but Jack himself never became unforgettable. The beanstalk grew high. The hero stayed small. Robin Hood, Taron Egerton, 2018. Robin Hood can be modern, stylish, and rebellious, but he still has to feel like a legend people would follow into danger. This version tried to reinvent the classic outlaw as a sleek, fast-cut action hero, almost like a medieval superhero origin story. The arrows moved like bullets, the costumes looked strangely modern, and the film wanted the old myth to feel young, political, and explosive. Taron Egerton had charm and physical energy, but his Robin never fully becomes the larger-than-life figure the movie needs. He looks sincere and he throws himself into the action, but the performance lacks the dangerous romance of the outlaw icon. Robin Hood should feel like a man who steals from power with a smile, outsmarts corruption with style, and inspires ordinary people to rise. Egerton often feels more like a young recruit still learning how to carry the legend attached to his name. Jamie Foxx brings intensity as his mentor, and Ben Mendelsohn goes big as the villain, which makes the center feel even lighter. The movie's strange tone and over-designed action already create problems, but the lead performance never fully convinces us that this man could become a symbol. The film wanted revolution. It got a well-dressed rebellion without enough soul. The Mummy, Tom Cruise, 2017. When a monster movie becomes a Tom Cruise action vehicle, the monster is already losing the fight. The Mummy was supposed to launch Universal's Dark Universe, a massive shared franchise built around classic monsters. That meant the film needed horror, mystery, ancient evil, and gothic atmosphere. Instead, Tom Cruise's presence pulled everything toward familiar action star territory. He plays Nick Morton as a reckless soldier of fortune, running, joking, crashing through set pieces, and surviving impossible situations with classic Cruise intensity. The problem is not that Cruise lacks charisma. The problem is that his charisma belongs to a different kind of movie. A mummy film should make the audience fear the curse, the tomb, the dead, and the unknown. But whenever Cruise takes over, the film starts feeling less like horror adventure and more like another mission built around his physical endurance. Sofia Boutella's Mummy should be the terrifying center, yet Cruise's star image keeps fighting for control. The movie also tries to set up future franchise mythology, which makes the story even more crowded. But the biggest tonal clash is right there in the lead performance. Cruise wants speed, jokes, and survival spectacle. The material wants dread. The result is a monster movie where the biggest supernatural force is not the mummy. It is the movie star. The Wolfman, Benicio del Toro, 2010. A werewolf story needs pain in the eyes before the monster ever grows claws. The Wolfman had the kind of gothic ingredients horror fans should have loved. Foggy estates, family secrets, cursed bloodlines, brutal transformations, and a tragic man losing control of the beast inside him. It was not meant to be a simple creature feature. It needed grief, madness, and doomed romance. Benicio del Toro, playing Lawrence Talbot, seemed like inspired casting because he can bring mystery and wounded intensity to quiet characters. But here, his stillness becomes a problem. Too often, Lawrence feels sleepy rather than tortured, distant rather than haunted. The character returns home after his brother's death and discovers a family nightmare waiting in the shadows. Yet Del Toro rarely gives the story the emotional urgency it needs. His performance is heavy, controlled, and sorrowful, but it does not always build into terror. Anthony Hopkins brings theatrical menace, Emily Blunt brings elegance, and the makeup effects deliver old-school monster texture, but the central tragedy feels muted. We should feel a man fighting the animal inside him. Instead, we often watch a sad man drifting through expensive fog. The Wolfman had blood, claws, and atmosphere. What it needed most was a heartbeat loud enough to become a howl. Dark Phoenix, Sophie Turner, 2019. A cosmic tragedy cannot survive if the person at the center never makes the disaster feel personal. Dark Phoenix should have been one of the most emotional X-Men stories ever put on screen. Jean Grey is not just another mutant losing control. She is a young woman being consumed by power, trauma, guilt, and fear, while the people who love her slowly realize they may have to stop her. That is devastating material. But Sophie Turner's performance as Jean became one of the film's biggest weaknesses because the entire movie depends on her emotional collapse. She needed to feel terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time, like someone powerful enough to destroy the world, but wounded enough that viewers still wanted to save her. Instead, her performance often feels stiff, distant, and too one-note for such a massive transformation. The film keeps telling us Jean is dangerous, but Turner rarely makes that danger feel unpredictable. The other actors bring history with the franchise, especially James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, but even their intensity cannot hide the empty center. Dark Phoenix also suffered from franchise fatigue and a rushed story, but the lead performance had to make audiences care. Without that emotional fire, the cosmic ending felt strangely small. Dolittle, Robert Downey Jr., 2020. Sometimes a star becomes so successful that nobody dares to tell him the performance is not working. Dolittle was meant to be Robert Downey Jr.'s big post-Iron Man family blockbuster, a colorful adventure full of talking animals, magical lands, strange creatures, and old-fashioned wonder. On paper, it should have been safe, a beloved literary character, a massive cast of voice actors, and one of the most bankable stars in the world. But Downey's performance turned the whole movie into something bizarre. Instead of giving Dr. Dolittle warmth, curiosity, and childlike charm, he buries the character under a strange accent, twitchy mannerisms, and a detached energy that makes him feel oddly hard to connect with. The movie needs him to be the emotional guide through a fantasy world, but he often feels like he is performing inside a private joke only he understands. The animals are loud, the plot is messy, and the adventure keeps throwing strange events at the screen, but the lead never grounds the chaos. Family audiences needed a lovable doctor who could make talking to animals feel magical. What they got was a superstar hiding behind eccentric choices. Dolittle did not just feel expensive, it felt like a reminder that charisma can disappear when a performance becomes too self-indulgent.
After Earth, Jaden Smith, 2013. A survival movie can survive strange creatures, empty landscapes, and even a cold script, but it cannot survive a lead who never makes fear feel alive. After Earth was built like a major father-son sci-fi event, with Will Smith's star power, futuristic world-building, crash land danger, and a young hero forced to prove himself on a hostile Earth. But Jaden Smith's performance as Kitai became the center of the problem. The role needed terror, growth, vulnerability, and sudden courage. Instead, too many scenes feel stiff, flat, and emotionally locked behind the same expression. Kitai is supposed to be a scared boy becoming a warrior, but the transformation rarely feels natural. Will Smith, oddly restrained as Cypher Rage, cannot carry the emotional weight from the background, so the entire movie depends on Jaden making the journey gripping. The monsters attack, The planet threatens him, and the story keeps insisting this is a life or death test. But the performance never fully sells the panic or the triumph. After Earth wanted to launch a new sci-fi legacy. Instead, it became a warning that a famous family name cannot replace screen presence. John Carter, Taylor Kitsch, 2012. A planet-hopping adventure needs a hero who makes impossible worlds feel worth following. John Carter had everything a giant sci-fi fantasy should have. Martian kingdoms, alien tribes, flying machines, ancient rivalries, massive battles, and the kind of pulp imagination that helped inspire generations of adventure stories. But Taylor Kitsch, as John Carter, never fully becomes the mythic figure the movie needs at its center. He looks heroic, moves well in action scenes, and gives the role a wounded seriousness. But the performance lacks the magnetic spark that turns a lost soldier into a legend. John Carter should feel like a man dragged across worlds and then reborn as something larger than himself. Instead, Kitsch often feels heavy, blank, and emotionally distant, even when the film is begging for wonder. The movie's marketing was confused, and its giant budget made failure almost impossible to hide. But the lead performance had to make audiences care enough to enter Barsoom. That never fully happened. The creatures were strange, the battles were expensive, and the universe was enormous. But the man in the middle never became unforgettable. John Carter did not just need a warrior. It needed a star.
So when Hollywood says a blockbuster failed because audiences didn't understand it, remember this list. Sometimes the problem is standing in the spotlight, wearing the costume, and dreaming the magic one scene at a time. These films had money, scale, and franchise dreams, but one wrong performance turned spectacle into damage. Now be honest, who destroyed their movie worst?